to everyone today. I'm a couple hours earlier than you. I'm in Montana today at my family's house. I hope everybody had a good holiday season, no matter what you celebrate. Been really looking forward to this talk today with Jacki. Unlike some of the people we invite, I haven't had a chance to really get to know her, so I'm excited to do that today with everyone else. And she's got some really interesting topics she's going to share with us today. And so I will turn it over to her and let her run things in the way that works for her. And one more reminder, just really quick, to let people know to mute when they aren't speaking. Thanks so much.
Okay, so hi, I'm Jacki Edry. Nice to meet you all. I'm really excited and honored to be here. And I'm going to talk, I prepared a presentation that I thought it would be nice to share with everybody. I live in Israel. I grew up in America. I am the author of a book called Moving Forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith, and a blogger and a neurodiversity advocate. And I speak mostly in the area of sensory stuff, sensory processing, sensory perception, and how that affects our reality. And so what I thought I would do is I would share a presentation, and then if there are questions at the end, or if I'm running on too long, or anything, please feel free to interact with me. And some of the things I'm going to say, probably if people in this audience are neurodiverse, neurodivergent, you probably are familiar with some of them, but I know that people also who are unfamiliar or professionals who don't have a lived experience, I thought it might be simple for some of you guys or stuff you already know, but I thought it was important to share some of it anyway for people that might not have the background knowledge that we're looking at. Okay, so my presentation is called Embracing Acquired Neurodivergence, and the little blob there, you see it on the cover of my book as well. I like colorful blobs. I think it represents a little about us. Before I get started, I wanted to just go a little over the terminology that I use. There's lots of different terminology in the autistic and neurodiverse communities, and so I wanted to sort of speak about it in the way that we'd all be on the same page and understand what I'm saying, what I mean when I say what I say. So that's a neurodiversity symbol. Sometimes it's gold. It's usually acceptable within the community. So what's neurodiversity? Basically, we all have neurodiverse. We're all neurodiverse, have differing brains. That's neurodiversity. And neurodivergent or neurodistinct is something that the average folks, I don't think there's anything that is atypical per se, in my own personal opinion. I think we're all different, but there are things that most of society tends to accept as fairly typical behavior, interaction with the world, and that's considered neurotypical. And neurodivergent or neurodistinct is different from that. So that's sort of the terminology I'm going to use. Differing neurotypes might include ADHD, autism, sensory or auditory processing disorder, dyslexia, Irlen Syndrome, and more. These are all things that are considered neurodistinct or neurodivergent by most of the people. And oftentimes, if someone is neurodivergent or neurodistinct, they have different types of thinking at the same time, which means they can have, instead of a standard logical thinking, they might have associative thinking patterns. They might be thinking in pictures, or all different kinds of things. So usually things don't go in a typical linear fashion. If you have somebody that's neurodistinct. I have always been a nonlinear thinker, and not usual. And I chose alternative education as to regular education from the time I was young, but I was still considered, I was never diagnosed with anything particularly until I had brain surgery. So what's my connection to neurodiversity? When I was young, I worked with an autistic child in high school. And then I worked at summer camps when I was in college for autistic kids, both very child-centered, very sort of informal settings. And everyone was different, and we figured out what they needed and made accommodations where we needed to make them, and went on and treated everybody in the most comfortable way for them, let's say. And we had a lot of fun and we learned a lot. In college, I wrote a thesis on educating autistic kids and sort of child-centered approaches and relaxed, flowing ways of working with them. Then when I moved to Israel, got married, had kids, and all my kids are neurodistinct. My oldest child is, most of them have attention issues, and my oldest son is autistic. Some of them have APD, some of them have auditory processing, sensory processing, and all kinds of things like that. And as I was raising them, I started to run, they were an inclusion program, so I started to run support groups for parents and training staff and things like that, how to help my children when they're in school. And so I did that for a number of years. And then in 2013, I had a large brainstem tumor discovered on my brainstem, and I needed to have it removed. And underwent very, very long, difficult brain surgery. Thank God it was benign, and thank God I'm here. So a little bit, like I started saying about my kids, they're all distinct. My son is autistic. 2 of my children were mistakenly diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. And what their actual diagnosis turned out to be, and I'll talk a little bit about that soon, were auditory processing disorder and Irlen Syndrome and sensory processing disorder. So the sensory processing and perception is what interfered with their ability to focus and concentrate and interact with the world. And that was the root of this ADHD. The attention issues are sensory issues and not attention issues. And when we regulate the sensory stuff, the attention also improved. So that was something that was very interesting. And living with neurodivergence is fascinating. It's always something to learn, creative, colorful, and in a lot of ways, a tremendous gift. But that gift, as it is, we need to learn how to manage it. We need to learn to make accommodations where we need to. And in doing that, people will get the most out of their situation and their challenges and be able to use what's a challenge and turn it into a gift in a lot of ways. So for me, in 2013, we discovered I started feeling really weak. I felt like a car that was sort of running out of gas. I had no energy. My blood work was fine. Everything seemed okay, you know, in terms of medically, but I knew that something was really wrong. And I couldn't understand also what people were saying in my left ear. They would talk next to me, and I feel like I was hearing from a wad of cotton. I didn't know what was wrong. My hearing test was in normal range, but there was something way off, and I just kept getting worse. And my neck started getting no one could figure it out. And finally, my ENT doctor sent me to get an MRI, and they discovered a massive tumor on my brainstem. It had probably been there for 10, 15 years. It was 5 centimeters around, which is huge for a brainstem because that's a very small area of the brain on the bottom of the brain. And all my central nerves were involved as well. So it was a very dangerous tumor. It was a miracle that I was on my feet, as he said, and I needed immediate surgery. So what happened? I went through surgery. They said I would wake up and feel like I'd been hit by a train. They said that everything would hurt. They said they weren't sure if I had physical disabilities, paralysis, things like that. What they didn't tell me was what was going to happen to my senses. Nobody talked to me about that. And when I woke up, all of my sensory perceptions had become scrambled and distorted. My visual field was way off. I didn't know what was going on. My balance was gone. I couldn't organize my body. And light would, I just didn't understand visually what was going on. And of course, I had my auditory issues. So I really had to relearn how to navigate the environment and what I was seeing. I was also unable to connect my mouth and my brain to formulate speech. So I knew what I wanted to say. I understood what people were saying. And it was just too much work, and I just couldn't engage my mouth. I just couldn't do it. So I spoke very minimally and just short sentences, a few words here and there, and I just couldn't do it. Which was, then I got the first-hand experience of what it feels like when I can't talk, or it took me too long to speak, and how the environment interacts with somebody who has issues formulating speech. I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. And I couldn't organize my body to accomplish simple tasks. I am still 10 years out. If somebody, like if I try to go to a yoga lesson or something and say to do all kinds of things, I will not be able to do it. I had to learn how to organize my body enough to walk and basically navigate my environment. It took months and months and months and months and months, years actually, to be able to get my body to cooperate with me. So I become more neurodistinct than I'd previously been. It was very, very harrowing, especially because it was combined with chronic pain. So it made it much more difficult and exhausting, but it was fascinating, because what happened to me was I started experiencing firsthand the things that I'd been observing with my neurodistinct kids, with my autistic son. Many of the things that I think that go on with people who are neurodistinct is they have sensory and perceptual issues, and that is the root of what's going on. So suddenly, not only have I been observing and living with and helping people, but suddenly I had that happen to me, and it's in my body with the cognition who's somebody who's been on a parent, a caretaker, and a professional who was in the field. My background is also in education. So I was kind of on both sides of the coin. I thought it gave me some interesting insights. So at the same time, I was analyzing myself and sort of relating everything back to what happened and what I'd been seeing all those years. And I thought that what I learned would be helpful to other people. So I wrote a book, and that's what my book's about, is that whole journey that I've been on and how it can help other people. So the first and probably the most important insight that I got from really acquired neurodivergence was you cannot reason with or argue. You cannot override with cognition the senses. Even if you want to, you can say to your senses to do like, no, this is nothing, no big deal. I can handle it, da, da, da. But I see, Dawn, you're smiling. You probably do maybe you recognize that. That is something I've met lots of neurodivergent people, lots of autistic people over the years, and they all say the same thing. And I think most professionals, or if it doesn't happen to you, you cannot, it doesn't make sense. You could think, somebody could reason with me, and you could tell the kid, don't do that, and the kid can try to, but don't realize that you actually cannot control that. Even if you cognitively know you shouldn't have a meltdown, and your body shouldn't freak out about something, if your senses are overload, you're going to do it. And that's a biological, neurological reaction, and you cannot argue with them. What you need to do is learn to understand how to avoid the situation, compensate for the situation, or get out of the situation and decompress, but you definitely can't control it. So that's really, really important for anybody who takes a behavioristic approach in the area of sensory stuff, because it's not going to work. So I'll take a little look about sensory processing. Sorry, this happens, I stutter. This is part of my neurology. So hold on a second. Okay, we rely on our senses to process information from the environment. That's how we survive. We see, we think, we feel. All the information comes in, and then we process it, and that's how we understand what's going on. A neurotypical, again, I use that term loosely because I don't think anybody is typical, but most people tend to have a series of automatic filters that prevent sensory overload. And we see and we feel more or less what we expect to. There are even like pilots who are in simulators doing training, and their experience that they put a person like in the middle of the landing field. The person who was in the simulator didn't expect the person to be there, so they land the plane on them. Your body, your brain automatically says, oh, that's not important, that shouldn't be there, and then they don't notice it. And that's what most of our brains do. If you live on a busy street, you're not going to notice the cars going by unless there's an ambulance making a different noise. Our brains say, this is relevant, this is not. But if we have sensory processing issues, those filters can be irregular, or they can be busted, or you can get too much information or not enough information, or sometimes both, a combination of those things, and those automatic filters aren't working correctly. People can be hypersensitive in certain things, hyposensitive, which are the sensory seeking. They need stimulation in certain things, or any combination of them in any of the senses. And that is not a stable thing too. That can change. 10 minutes, you know, whatever it might be in the environment might trigger something. That can change the whole situation. So somebody can be hypersensitive and then 10 minutes later be seeking stimulation in that same sense. It's not something that is a static thing in any way, shape, or form. And sensory processing issues are prevalent amongst autistic individuals, people diagnosed with Irlen, dyslexia, ADHD, APD, SPD, and anything else you can imagine. Dysregulated sensory processing system makes understanding and interpreting the world challenging, and at times can be very frightening. And another thing to understand, and many educators and professionals and parents, they don't understand how hard it is when you have a dysregulated sensory processing system. And it's so much harder to get through the day. People who live with that work really hard. So if they're going to get tired 10 minutes into class, in this classroom situation, because of the noise, because of the lights, because of this, it's not that they're lazy. It's because they're exhausted. They're working much harder than average folks, and that's something to be respected. And like I said before, you cannot ignore sensory input. Logic does not overrule it. And if you are overstimulated, it triggers a fight, flight, freeze response. And in a non-sensory friendly environment, the person cannot turn that off. And if you get overloaded, it can lead to a meltdown or a nervous system overload. So it's best to avoid or accommodate for triggering situations before they explode. Some people think if you keep pushing a person into that sensory environment, they will get used to it. I can vouch for it firsthand. Don't get used to it. It just traumatizes you. If someone makes you stay in that situation and thinks that's therapy to keep putting you in that sensory situation over and over and over and over again, that is just going to cause trauma. It is not going to change. It's not going to fix the system. If there's a way to fix the system to accommodate, great, but it's not done by behavior. And understand that meltdowns are not the same as misbehaving. Somebody who's in the midst of a meltdown may misbehave, but it's not because they're acting badly. It's because they have to, they're in the escape mode, they're in the defense mode, they're in the fighting for their life mode, because their system is overloaded and they are in a situation where they are in danger. So I want to take a quick, any questions before I continue? We okay? Okay, I want to take a quick look now. I'll run through the senses and things going on in certain senses. Each sense and how it affects us. So let's start with the visual sense, which is our most dominant sense. Approximately 70% of our sensory input is done through our visual field, which is why it's so very important to have a stabilized visual field. Visual perception and processing is it's neurological. It's what the brain does, what the information picked up with the eye. And this is a really important point, because if somebody has visual processing issues and they go to the eye doctor and they do an eye test, the eye doctor will say everything's fine. Or maybe you need glasses you have a number of new glasses or some prescription, but if you're having these visual distortions, it has nothing to do with, you're fine. What are you making noise about? I've been to ophthalmologists and neuro-ophthalmologists, and until I found out about Irlen Syndrome, these are Irlen spectral spectrals, which I'm wearing now. I'll tell you about them in a minute. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. they, you know, I don't know what they were thinking, but no, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. And I wasn't. So irregular visual perception and processing is found usually with people diagnosed with dyslexia, Irlen Syndrome, ADHD, autism, and other neurological differences. Sometimes also things like epilepsy can cause all these sort of visual disturbances as well. And vestibular stability is also affected by visual processing. It's your ears and your eyes work together, and if your eye movements aren't the same, or if you're having some sort of visual disturbance, then it will knock off your vestibular system. So after my surgery, I also have a problem with my left vestibular nerve was damaged. But my eye and the eye movement, my left eye doesn't move after the side-to-side movement doesn't move in a regulated fashion. So that also affects it. But the light processing actually is what threw me off. The conversation between the eyes and the ears wasn't coordinated, and I totally had no balance. And I couldn't ride in a car, and I couldn't do any of those other things. When I did get my Irlen lenses, that stabilized at least the visual disturbance from light processing, and I was able to balance most of the time. So I don't need a cane all the time now, only sometimes. So I've said Irlen a bunch of times, now I'll explain. It's a neurologically based difficulty perceiving and processing visual information, causing visual stress, light sensitivity, many cases problems reading as well. Not always, but in many, many cases. It can be genetic. In many cases, it is genetic. 4 of my children have Irlen lenses. Mine, maybe I had it and I didn't know because I had difficulty with depth perception at night, but it must have been a very mild case if I did have it when I was younger, because I had absolutely no reading issues. It's not identified, like I said, by an ophthalmologist or a didactic assessment. The only people that can identify it are Irlen testers. You can go on the irlen.com website, and there's questionnaires there, and you can get all the information you need on their site. They can identify and fit you with colored lenses if you need them, if you have Irlen. It can affect about 15% of the general population. That's a lot of people who have it. 50% of individuals with reading and learning difficulties, 30% of individuals with ADHD and autism, and significant portion of individuals with brain injury, chronic headaches, and migraine. That's sourced from the Irlen website. Very, very significant and not well known, unfortunately, because my personal experience was when I went to the neurologist and told them about it, the pediatric neurologist and told them about it, the didactic assessment people then told them about it, and the schools told them about it. They also, and the eye doctor, and they all said very nice and did nothing about it, which means it's not something medically treated. It's not something they can prescribe a pill about, you know, like they don't, it's not measured in numbers because it's neurological, so they tend to disregard it, which is, I think, one of the reasons it's not well known and not tested for, because nobody's really looking into it because it's not something that's measured. So how do you get an Irlen assessment? It's a 2-part assessment. The first visual issues are corrected with colored spectral filters or overlays. If it's just reading, then you can use overlays, but it generally affects every aspect of a reality. So, you really, colored spectral filters actually are the best thing to do. Like I said, it's not usually recognized, and the Ministry of Education doesn't usually suggest screening or, which is very unfortunate, because if a kid shows slow reading in 1st grade and they would send them to get an Irlen test, it could help them avoid many, many, many years of remedial instruction, failure, misdiagnosis of dyslexia. Some people do have dyslexia and Irlen, but in many cases, in my children's, they were diagnosed with dyslexia. One of them couldn't read more than a few paragraphs in 11th grade, and one of them in 5th, and they couldn't do mathematics and failed for many, many years in school, and they got ear glasses, and within a few months were reading and doing everything fluently with a little bit of, and started closing the gaps. So if it's detected early, it can avoid all of those many years and problems with self-image and problems and with friends, you know, and social interactions because of visual disturbances, and inability to play soccer because you can't track a ball, and all these other things could be avoided if very simple test and a colored spectral filter, as opposed to many years of everything and lots of money. So I do feel it's important, and I talk about it a lot to get the word out about this because it's a real game changer. So auditory processing is the same thing, is similar to visual, and it's neurological. It's not picked up on a typical hearing test. My kids with severe auditory processing problems, one of them actually has hearing aids now, low gain hearing aids, which have been incredible. And that's another thing that's not well known, low gain hearing aids. And they were not picked up. Your regular hearing test, where you hear a few words or beeps, is totally normal range. But if the person can't follow a conversation, can't understand what's going on in class, you tell them to go, let's say, go get something from the bedroom, and they come back with something sounds similar, or missing beginnings, ends of words, all kinds of things like that could have to do with auditory processing issues. It can exist on its own, but many times it coexists with ADHD, autism, other neurological differences, many times with Irlen as well. And many times it's misdiagnosed with ADHD as ADHD, and I'll tell you exactly why. Let's say a child is sitting in a class, okay? And the teacher is talking. And the teacher says, the teacher's saying a few words, and the child is cognitively on par with the rest of the class, let's say. And so the child misses a key word, let's say in a sentence or in a paragraph. And so they start thinking through inference, what might the meaning of the word be? And so they zone out a little bit to think about what that word might be. And then they come back, oh, I got the meaning. And they zone back in, but the teachers continue talking. So they don't know, they've gotten lost. Now, if you do that 4 or 5 times within 10 minutes, that child is going to be totally lost and totally exhausted. And all their cognitive, and they're so busy trying to perceive and process the information that their cognitive resources are going to be used up. And then they will not be able to remember what they are hearing or learning because they have no more cognitive resources left. So that sort of the kind of, and then the teacher, they start daydreaming because they can't follow anyway. And then the teacher will say, oh, there's something wrong, the child's not paying attention. So the parent will take the child to the neurologist, and the neurologist say, because child paying attention? No, can they follow the class? No. Oh, they must have ADHD. And then they'll probably prescribe them Ritalin, which will not solve the issue because it's an auditory processing issue. So if a parent or somebody feels like there's something going on with auditory processing, or if you're an adult as well, and you're missing parts of words, if you are unable to decipher sounds in a noisy environment, auditory distracted from auditory things, then you might want to get tested for an APD because that won't happen automatically. And there are tools that can help with that. If it's school, it's an acoustic classroom. There's maybe low gain hearing aids, which don't make the volume go up very. It's a minimally. It's a regular hearing aid with a program that just lets the volume go up a little bit. But if you get a very high quality hearing aid, it will filter the background sound. So if the brain is not filtering the background sound, the hearing aid's doing the work for the brain. So that's very helpful. There's other tool from Nuance Hearing, which it looks like a little iRobot you can put on a desk and then decide which direction you want to hear the sound from. So like from the teacher talking, kids talking, and it puts the sound right into an earphone. And that's something that was designed for people with ADHD, but actually is good for people with an auditory processing problem. Like I said, it's exhausting. Reading can help clarify pronunciation. Yes.
It looks like we have possibly a real-time example of auditory processing challenges. Someone was asking if we could slow down just a little bit.
Absolutely. Yes, I can slow down as much as you need me to. So reading can help clarify pronunciation. when my son, he didn't understand a lot of words, I would type them to him or write them out, and then he would understand what was going on, and how to hear the word or pronounce. Reading lips is helpful as well, and like I said, assistive technology. Nuance Hearing has a nice little machine that you can use. iPhone has something called Live Listen, which you can put the phone next to someone speaking, and it's a free thing. It's an app on iPhone, and if you have AirPods, it will send the signal directly to your earphones. So you can do it from a distance. At the teacher's desk, you can put the phone, which is what my kids did before I had the Nuance Hearing machine, and then it will but they will hear directly into their earphone. So that's also very helpful. And then we have other senses. Tactile. I think auditory and visual are the two most dominant and affect most people's ability to function in most environments, particularly in the schools or workplace. But there are other things that are definitely affect. Tactile, sometimes people don't like being touched. Itchy tags can ruin somebody's day, that's for sure. Uncomfortable clothes. I wouldn't, if you have a kid, let's say, that only likes to wear the sweatsuit that's been washed 50 times, then, if you put them in nice clothes and it makes them uncomfortable, they're not going to be able to learn. They're not going to feel calm. It's probably best to let them keep the nice clothes in the wardrobe and feel comfortable. Sometimes irritability and pain can ruin someone's day, from simple things like clothing. And also hypersensitive touch in schools, let's say, can be a problem, because let's say a kid goes by someone sitting at a desk and touches them with their backpack or brushes by them, and that could feel like they're being hit, which could cause a fight, in the school and things like that. Or sometimes people are looking for deep touch, and it will make someone uncomfortable because they don't want to be touching somebody or give such a strong hug to them and stuff. So the tactile sense is also important. The gustatory sense is eating. Some people are picky with eating. Some people have aversion to textures or mixing food. I wouldn't fight with that. I could say that when my son was young, he didn't, he ate 5 foods, I think, until he was, I don't even know. He was definitely way into elementary school, verging on teenager years. But because of the smell, because of the texture, because of whatever it was revolting to him. You can't force a person to eat something. And if you fight about food, there will be emotional damage about that, oftentimes eating disorders or serious distress. The way we helped our kids with that sort of thing was just leaving lots of bowls of different foods around in different textures, so that in the play area or whatever, just leaving them around. And as they were exposed to them more, they sometimes suddenly would touch something or put something in their mouth or explore it. It would become less offensive when they were ready. And now my son eats everything. But it's not something to make a war about, for sure. Because if you make a war about food, it's always going to lead to power plays, always going to lead to frustration, and could lead to serious psychological damage. The olfactory sense, nausea can happen from, or headaches from strong smells, perfume, classroom foods, someone eating in class, coming after gym, and someone opening a tuna sandwich and somebody putting on strong perfume. I can say this last week that my son brought some air freshener for the house, and he just loved it. He thought it was great, and he sprayed it around the house. And I was so sick from it. I had such a headache from it, and I was not nice to anybody because I was suffering so badly, and I couldn't do anything about it. So keep in mind, if a person says they're sensitive about it, don't fight with it. Try and give them a sterile environment because it can really make them feel ill. Okay, so if a person's having a sensory overload, the person can understand logically what's going on, but can't prevent their body from getting triggered. And it's a very stressful situation. And if you shout at a person who's in a sensory overload or punish them, it's going to make it worse. And if you force a person to stay in a sensory challenging situation, it definitely causes trauma and emotional damage, and it's seriously distressing. And a meltdown, which is when your body just, it's like a circuit breaker that's tripped. You know, there's too much of a flow and the circuit breaker trips, and that's it. You shut down. That's what happens when you have a sensory system or nervous system overload or meltdown. Some people don't like the word meltdown, but you know, it's a familiar word to people, so they know what I'm talking about. I can say there's always a reason for a meltdown. It is not behaving badly. Something happens that triggers a person and makes them feel awful. And it's not somebody being spoiled. Like I said, it's like a trip circuit breaker. And many people who are having meltdowns or about to have a meltdown will feel bad about it, and they will say to themselves, you know, like, the other people will say, well, this music's not so loud. It's no big deal. Why are you making such a big deal about it? You know, it's not so annoying. What, you're hypersensitive. And then you feel bad about it. Like, maybe I am, and maybe I'm ruining everybody's fun. The fact is, you can't do anything about it, and people need to be considerate about it or enable you to remove yourself from the situation. And if you can find something that will help you, use it. If it's sound sensitive headphones that will reduce sound, if it's ear spectral filters, if it's not going to that wedding that there's going to be flashing light, or that mall, and all those things that you need to do to feel more comfortable, I suggest you do that, because you don't want to get to the situation where that happens. It's awful, and you don't want to force a child into that situation. If somebody says, we want to go to the mall, and the kid, you know, has a tantrum before they go in, or the wedding, or whatever it may be, no, there's a reason for it, and maybe it's not the right time or the right place to take the person. So if you see that person's having these sort of behavioral outbursts, try and figure out the trigger. Or if you have them with yourself, or if you're observing somebody else, usually it's something sensory going on. And once the triggers are recognized, it's best to prevent them before the meltdown occurs. And if a person is in a situation with an overload, the best thing to do is get into a safe, quiet place. Let them regulate. Don't come and start talking about it in the midst of the situation. Something to drink, quiet, maybe dark. And once the person is calmed down and back to themselves, it will be easier to discuss what happened and how to prevent it for the next time. And never, ever punish them a meltdown, because it can really just induce trauma. I want to talk a little about speech and communication. Like I said, I had issues with speech, and my son is practically well, he's doing better now. He's able to communicate a lot better in the last few years. But until the last few years, he was speaking maybe 2-word sentences most of the time, and not always, and certainly couldn't talk abstractly. And I have speech issues. Thank God I'm okay now, but I did for the first few years after my surgery. I had serious issues, and I still stutter sometimes. Words get stuck, and if I'm tired, then I feel like my mouth actually is disconnected from my brain, and so I can hear somebody else speaking out of my mouth, which is really weird. When that happens, I go to bed. That's usually a really bad sign. So formulating speech is extremely complex, probably one of the most complex things that we do. And it involves thought, motor coordination, and organization, and all kinds of things. There are many modes of communication. People communicate in so many different ways, and they should all be acceptable. Okay? If a person having a hard time speaking and they have a better way of getting their their thoughts across or their feelings across, that should be okay. You know, you could still working on improving speech, but that doesn't mean you should force them into doing something that they're incapable of doing or that is torture for them at the time. Always work to improve. There's no problem with that. But please, you know, accept that there are different modes of communication, and many, many times a person will communicate using several modes of communication, depending on the day, the hour, and the abilities. Always, 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 always assume competence. Don't assume that if a person can't speak, they don't understand. This is something that I've seen professionals, educators, parents, everybody does this. If the kid can't speak or the person can't speak, or someone, a doctor did this, a neurologist, to my husband. I was in the room and I couldn't speak. He said, was she like this before her surgery? Or you talk about the kid. Oh, he's like this and this and this and that. And they hear you and they can't respond, but they understand. And if you look carefully, you might see their eye flinch because they're hurt. Understand. Always assume there's competence, and don't say anything bad about somebody who's nonverbal around them ever. Just don't do it, because you don't know what they're thinking and feeling. And you should try to include them in the decision-making process. Just because they can't speak, that doesn't mean they can't decide things. Try and look for ways to allow them to choose between two things, even if it's a gesture, whatever it may be regarding them. Try and find a way to include them in the decision-making process. That's good for cognition, it's good for emotion, and it's good for communication. Another thing that's misunderstood a lot is ways of expression. Many people, a lot of people I know that are autistic, they will speak in sort of a monotone way, or they won't show a lot of variation in their voice or emotion. That doesn't mean they don't feel or that they don't have those emotions. It's just the way their speech is working. And oftentimes they have more even. They're more sensitive than the average folks. And it doesn't mean if they don't express it verbally that they lack those feelings or emotions. And that's what people tend to misunderstand a lot of ways. And some people think a picture's not in words, and words are the second language. My son, his head's like a library full of pictures and movies, and he's learned to communicate because he wants to communicate. But if you ask him to look something up, he'll go to the Google Pictures. And it's actually a very interesting experiment to do if you've never done this, is try and see, look up concepts in Google Pictures. Because sometimes people say, they're talking to somebody, let's say an autistic kid, and they'll say, you're saying things that are not connected. But it's an abstract concept. So if you go to Google Pictures and you type in the word red, then you'll come up with so many different things that seem non-connected, but they're all red. And so sometimes the categories that form in people's brains are different than what the average folks' brains will form, especially if you're thinking in pictures and it's abstract concepts. Augmentative communication can be very helpful for people who have difficulty speaking, typing. There are all kinds of programs that can help, but I found that recently most people have cell phones, and there are apps like WhatsApp and things like that. It doesn't even make the person feel unusual or if they stand out, because most people are texting. So that has actually really, really helped my son. He texts a lot. He looks up stuff on Google and shows me his phone. And just using those different technologies and speech together can actually get a lot of communication going that we couldn't get going a few years ago, because he loses a bit of this and a bit of that, and we can follow him. And I think that teaching those skills to use as many different modalities of communication is wonderful, and give people the opportunity. And if they can speak better, type better than they can speak, then go for it. You know, there are times they'll have to speak, but if a person's feeling comfortable communicating in a different way, that should be okay. And always ask the person how they want to communicate. Even in the workplace, I mean, in schools, these accommodations can be made if you speak to your employers about them. Many people who have auditory processing issues want to communicate by getting meeting notes first or emails, and they perform much better in the workplace by being able to read what's going on as opposed to relying on the auditory input. Another thing that's very common when a person has communication difficulties, particularly if they're nonverbal, is people tend to talk to them as if they're infants. They talk down, they infantilize it. They think that they don't understand, and if someone comes to my 26-year-old young man with his beard and said to him, "Oh, so cute," maybe do that to somebody who's 5, not to somebody who's got cognitive intact but just can't express himself. That doesn't, you should speak to everyone and treat everyone on the age-appropriate level. People with APD, auditory processing issues, don't realize how much language they miss. So if you're speaking to somebody and you sense from their eyes, from their movement, from their answers, that they miss something, please try and ensure they understand you. Because they may think they understand you because they don't know what they've missed, or they've heard the word, half the word, or they heard a different word and sort of made sense to them, but it's not what you intended. So try and help them ensure that they understand what you're talking about. Again, reading lips and messaging help facilitate understanding. Autism is a different neurotype. And certainly not a disease, and not something to be eradicated. I'm saying this, I'm sure I'm speaking, nobody in this audience is going to think those things, but I think it's important for me to state my opinion about that. So, autistic individuals perceive and process information differently than neurotypical people. Sensory processing definitely rules. It's significant in every autistic person I've ever sensory processing differs. And I think, like I said, the automatic filter, particularly in autism, tends to be different or busted, right? Sometimes they can't filter any information, and they see and feel and hear everything going on, and it just becomes such an overload that they have to shut off the world because it's too overwhelming. And I think that is a central feature of autism. Or they have to stim to compensate for that. And stims are absolutely to regulate the system. They are not behavioral issues to be eliminated. And as the system, particularly the sensory system, regulates, the need to stim decreases. I can say from personal experience that one of the weird things that happened to me after my surgery was I felt as if there was a weight sort of pushing me to the side, like 50 pounds was pushing me over, and although I was standing and looking like no one from the outside could detect this thing was going on, and I looked like I was standing and everything was okay, I felt like someone's pushing me over. And what I found is I would stand in the middle of the room and rock, and that would stabilize me. And my physical therapist came, and she told me, hang on to the chair and rock back and forth, and I started laughing. I said, "You're teaching me to rock?" She said, "Yes, of course, it balances the vestibular system." I said, "Well, if I was autistic, you'd be telling it that I'm not supposed to do that because it's a stim." And it was so clear to her and so clear to me. But most people from the outside don't understand that stims are not a bad thing. And they don't prevent a person from being connected to the world, and they don't prevent a person from communicating or learning. They actually, in many cases, help a person to focus and learn. Another myth, myth busting a little bit, is that many people, when they hear the word autism, they think that, especially new parents of newly diagnosed children who've heard the medical model, will think that their child is not going to ever have a potentially happy and fulfilling life. And it's a real fear. That's wrong. Autistic individuals can have potential to have a happy and fulfilling life. It just need to find the things that they need to compensate, the accommodations, things that make them feel good, and why not? You know, and many autistic individuals have unique perspectives and talents that can be beneficial in the workplace, different ways of thinking, unique talents. And some people have super talents, like, you know, but most people, I think there's a whole spectrum, just like in any other ways in terms of intelligence or talents. But sometimes they have unique perspective and talents that can be very beneficial in the workplace. And a lot of companies now are starting to try and integrate people who are neurodivergent into the workplace and make accommodations because they realize it. Use of language and communication tend to differ of the neurotypical. And many autistic individuals need assistance to develop effective communication skills, augmentative communication sometimes, all different ways of communication, but they'll need help. Understanding emotions, social interaction, body language. Another thing that's often misunderstood is thinking that autistic people can't empathize with others. I found actually many can, they're so empathetic that they have to turn it off a little bit because it hurts. And they certainly can develop loving relationships. It just might look a little different than the average folks. That's all. I have to say one word about my autistic son, that he's probably the most kind. He has never, ever hurt anybody in his entire life. He's probably the most innocent, clean, kind person I have ever met, and I'm so privileged to be his mother. New diagnosis, well, I've seen recently a lot of people talking about AuDHD, which is autism and ADHD together. And I honestly I can't imagine that somebody who's autistic is not going to have attention issues sometimes because of the sensory interference. So I imagine that they go hand in hand, but that's just my personal theory. According to the CDC, over 6 million children in the US are diagnosed with ADHD. That's huge. 62% are treated with medication, 47% receive behavioral therapies. This is from the CDC I'm quoting. In many instances, sensory issues can appear to be ADHD, particularly things involving visual and auditory perception. So it can be a misdiagnosis of ADHD. And sensory issues should be addressed before considering other forms of treatment, which are medication. Oftentimes, because people do get distracted, they need to learn a lot of skills and techniques to help them learn to stay on track and get organized. And time management is another thing that tends to disappear. Time tends to disappear. People who sometimes people with ADHD get hyper-focused on something as well. So they go into their space and disappear for hours doing something. I can vouch for that one firsthand. I sit down to write something and then it's dark out, and I don't know how that happened when it was lunch, and I forgot to eat, and I forgot to use a toilet, and all those other things. I think that ADHD in a lot of ways, a lot of CEOs have it, a lot of very high level people have it. They can't manage the daily schedule, they get distracted, but they tend to be creative thinkers, many times artistic, out of the box. And what I say to my kids, who are all been diagnosed with that lovely thing, is that I don't call it ADHD. Why does it have to be a disorder? I call it divided attention. And I say that when I was young, computers could do like 2 or 3 things, right? And then they would crash. They would kind of go, slow down, they crash, right? And now there's like an iPhone, okay, which can do 50 things at once. You can have so many things, browsers things open, and you can apps running, and it can do all those different things. So my kids, when they were diagnosed, I said to them, okay, which one of these would you prefer? And of course, they always say, I go for the iPhone, right? That's all right. Well, a typical neurotypical brain that's linear is going to be like that older computer. It does everything sort of straightforward and linear and whatever. The iPhone is more like a person with divided attention, which some people call ADHD. Now, if you like that iPhone, that's great. That's a very powerful tool. Many people with ADHD pay attention to detail, like everything. But in order to use that effectively, you have to know how to use the operating system, right? You need to know how to toggle through the programs. You need to know to manage them. But if you learn how to do all those things, then you've got a significant advantage over many of the average folks. And actually, many of the things in the school system that the school system will limit a person and cause them to feel that they're deficient, in the real world, those are the things that are exactly the things that are the benefits. So the attention to every detail, like for my daughter, who is now she's a journalist and a media researcher, and she's also a sign language interpreter and all these other things. They're all because she can pay attention to all those details and toggle through all those different things. But the educational system likes you to sit and not think out of the box and do traditional things and not move. So to explain that, when they get in the real world, it will be an advantage, but it's very important to learn how to operate the machine. You need to learn to manage time. You need to learn to streamline things. You need to learn to do things step by step. You need to learn to put things in one place all the time so that you don't have to look for your keys every morning. There are a lot of different things that can be done and a lot of apps that can help do those things to make life easier. But if you learn to manage it properly, it's a great gift. Brains. All these things we're talking about are brain things. So I'm going to tell you something optimistic that in many years ago, people said this was not true, but this has definitely been proven true now. Brains have plasticity and they can improve throughout life. And it doesn't matter how old you are or what happened to your brain. You can always, always, always improve them. New connections are being formed all the time. And the more you use it and practice, you will be able to improve your brain and your cognition and even your intelligence per se. So know that no matter what any doctor might have told you or any teacher might have told you, you can always change your brain and always improve your brain. And my brain was really messed, and I'm doing okay, right? New connections are formed even if they're damaged. I know, I live in Israel, and the place that I was taking my son for treatment was a Feuerstein Institute, and they had a department for brain injured. And in Israel, sometimes we have, as probably everybody's familiar, terrorist attacks. And at one of the guys that was in the center there was the head of a restaurant. He was the head of a shift, and the terrorist walked in and exploded a dirty bomb, and his brain was actually blown partially out of his head. He has bits of nails. Dirty bombs have nails and things like that in it, so they can do more damage than just explode. And his parents were told to donate his organs. They didn't. In any case, miraculously, he recovered, but his recovery was very, 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 very long. And I met him years after his surgery. He did not know any language. He learned to speak 2 languages. He learned to run a coffee shop. He learned to, he married a person, a wonderful woman, had children. Things can happen, miracles can happen in brains. I know another one who also was injured in the army, and the language area of his brain was actually destroyed, and he learned to speak. So different neurological areas can take over. It's a long process. People need to understand, especially therapists, all these things, cognitive processes, brain changing, all this other stuff. It's not going to happen fast. It takes years, but once you get the foundations in place, then the sky's the limit. And that's really, really important. So if anyone tells you otherwise, you can send them to me. They're wrong. Progress should be measured individually. Please do not compare yourself or your child to anybody else. If you're moving forward and getting better, if you're having an issue, if your kid is learning, it doesn't matter if it's at a different pace than anybody else, and it doesn't matter They kept trying to put my child in the special education. I had him in inclusion because he is 2 years behind, more than 2 years behind the other people. And we said, no, he's learning, he's doing well, he's socially interacting with people and learning from them. He's staying where he is. But people tend to compare, and they shouldn't. What's important is the forward movement and well-being. And assistive devices, technology can help people express themselves and progress. All right, so quick recap, neurodiversity, we're all neurodiverse. That's how we're supposed to be. And in light of this, we should try to be accepting of our differences and patient with ourselves. Environment needs to be adjusted and accommodations be made for neurodivergent individuals. Always assume competence. That will enable neurodivergent individuals to thrive, prosper, communicate, feel comfortable in their sensory environments. Neurodivergent individuals work much harder than neurotypical individuals. It's important to recognize their efforts. Neurodivergent individuals contribute incredible things to the world. Temple Grandin says very nicely, the world needs all types of minds. And neurodivergent individuals are different, but not lesser than neurotypicals. That's very important to understand. A little bit about moving forward. As a person who's coming from where I came from, there are times we need to readjust the expectations for our lives and our families. If we have something happen to us, if our children are diagnosed, or whatever it may be. Challenge are also opportunities for growth. Some days will be easier and others are going to be difficult. When black clouds appear on the horizon, say, oh, you're here again. All right, the wind's going to come, they're going to blow them away. Tomorrow's going to be a new day. Just take it one day at a time and let them go. If we start thinking about them, it's going to bring us down. So I know it's natural to do that, but to try and practice. It's just my tips for life. Let them go on by. And busying yourself by doing good and trying to make the world a better place brings happiness and meaning to life, especially in the face of challenge. Surround yourself with positive people and true friends. Not try to please everybody around you. The people who love you are going to love you even if you're different. And if they're not, then you have to think all the time about what people are thinking of you. At least for me, my life's nice because I don't give a hoot about what anybody thinks about me. And if I can't be comfortable, then those are not the kind of people who are judging me. They're not the kind of people I want to be around anyway. So I don't sweat it. Remember, we all have a mission to fill in life, a purpose in life. You're neurodivergent, you have a purpose. It's everybody does. We're all beautiful souls. If you believe in God, God gave us a reason to come down on this earth, and everyone has their own purpose. It doesn't matter what you look like and what you feel like. And life isn't about everything being perfect or achieving happiness, when goals are reached. It's the way, along the way, you need to live your life fully. And I think the life is the way. It's not the end goal. It's a process. The journey and the process, and appreciating the good around you. And a positive mindset will help give you strength to wade through the challenges. One thing I do every night before I go to bed is I just think about, even if I had a really hard day, a few of the good things that happened in me the days that I'm thankful for. And that really helps. And thankful can be that I was able to get out of the bed and walk across the room. That's something to be thankful for, because not everybody can do it. And some days you can do it. And if you can walk, talk, eat, think, and hug somebody, or take your doggy for the walk, or whatever you're going to do, if you have a family, if you have food on your table, if you have a roof over your head, you've won the lottery, and really life is good. So if you can think about a few of those things before going to bed, and when you wake up in the morning, say, oh, I woke up, I'm alive, and I can get out of bed, you won the lottery again. So we have a lot to be thankful for, and thinking about that helps. And taking things one a day at a time, appreciating the good, and knowing we can be on a roller coaster sometime. We need to go with the flow. Have hope, never give up, because life's a blessing and a gift. That's about it.
Beautiful. I have about 1 million people I want to send this to when Roger prepares it. As I get ready to go to my appointment, I was hoping you might talk a little bit about the responses: fight, flight, freeze, and now
Okay,
they've added fawn, and I think that's
I didn't
particularly.
understand you. What?
Oh, they added the word fawning as a response to trauma or danger. So basically just people pleasing,
Okay,
backing down. And I see a
okay,
lot of people, because they are genuinely kind and want to get along, they start just letting people pile it on and people please. It's
sure,
really dangerous. I thought
absolutely.
maybe, do you see that as a particular danger for neuro expansive or neurodivergent people,
Absolutely.
to
And I
people
think
please?
also sometimes like things like ABA teaches that and teaches compliance, and teaches you have to do right or wrong, and there's no gray, and you need to comply. And oftentimes that sort of way of teaching also will take it teaches a person to be compliant to the point where they will not protect themselves. And it is very, very, very dangerous.
There is a question of what type of therapist would help with accommodations, etc. Can a professional look at needs alone, or is a diagnosis necessary?
Depending, accommodations by who? If it's like the school district, or I don't know how it works in America with Social Security or stuff like that. I think in a lot of ways, you will need to have a professional diagnosis to be accepted. But if you're looking to improve the quality of your life and you're not waiting for that stuff to happen, then you can go on your own. Irlen, for example, or getting some testing, like equipment for auditory processing sensitivity, something like that. You do that on your own, because people who tend to diagnose these things are not going to even suggest that you do those things. They tend to give you letters or some sort of assessment, and they don't give you anything to do with it. Just say you're this, and then you're supposed to go home and say, okay, what does that mean? So I would do the research and take care of yourself. And at the same time, you needed to for eligibility for services or whatever you're trying to services or accommodations, sometimes in a workplace or an educational system. Educational system, I think, tends to be more demanding of having actually officially done than a workplace where you say, these things are difficult for me. If you're in a good workplace, they will make those accommodations just according to you're discussing with them.
Great. There's also a compliment here from the same person saying this was an excellent talk and very helpful.
Oh, thank you.
And next comment is, I feel empowered and validated by this talk. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
I am so glad to hear that. That is exactly what I wanted to have. I am so glad to hear that. Thank you so much for that feedback.
Okay, and yes, accommodations can improve quality of life. And there is one question that reads, how do I command my brain to relax and slow down my thoughts to readjust my mood to rest?
Okay. Well, everybody's brain works differently. I'll tell you something. Sometimes my brain goes over. Well, I actually speak to my brain and I tell it to chill out. Like if I tend to hold on, ruminate. Sorry, I lost the word in English. Sometimes my languages have a traffic jam in the brain. So if I ruminate on something, right, my thoughts are going too fast, and I go over and over and over. What could have happened? What this and that? And I shouldn't have done this. And I realize that I'm giving myself a hard time. So I say to myself, you know, you're just creating these movies in your brain that aren't even reality because it's something that already happened or something that might happen, but they're not reality. These are images that we're making for ourselves. So if I say to myself to stop giving myself a head trip or creating these stories in my head that are not actually existing, because we're, you know, if it's happened in the past and we're reliving it, we're probably embellishing it with something else, and you can't change it anyway. And if something in the future, then it's not happening yet. So I tell my brain, you know, to stop playing tricks on me, and I take a deep breath. And if I'm sensory overwhelmed, I tend to put myself in a quiet place, or if I like music or something, and music sometimes is just quiet, sometimes it's dark. Walking in nature, but calling myself out on the fact that I'm giving myself a hard time and saying that it's, you know, not beneficial to me, and busying myself doing something good for somebody else. If I do something positive, then I'm getting myself out of my own head, and that is also helpful. But sometimes we are too much up in our own heads and give ourselves, like I said, give ourselves a very hard time. And if you're giving to somebody else or doing something useful, then you leave your head and your feelings, and oftentimes then the nervous system will settle down, and the brain, your thoughts will settle down as well. If you start getting on a head trip, and then you say to yourself, oh, why am I like this? And oh no, I can't sleep. Oh no, I can't fall asleep. So I'm gonna, then you're definitely not gonna fall asleep. You just gotta just busy yourself and do something else that makes you feel good or help somebody.
All right, same person saying, thank you for helping me understand myself. All right, and then
Thank you so much.
any suggestions on how to help autistic child with noise in school cafeteria? Tells me it's too loud when he gets home, refuses ear protection, enjoys being social, wants to ask others to be quiet. 60 plus kids in the room. The only other option is to eat in isolation.
Well, maybe the school can be nice and help you, like a quieter eating area where they can have some tables with some friends they can eat. Maybe you can get like there's not those big clunky sound hearing you know, what do you call it, headphones that protect you from noise, but there's some people have said that they've been very helpful. The Loop, you can get them on Amazon, the Loop hearing, the little earplugs, but you can hear discussion. It just takes off some of the decibels, and they're very small, and they look like, you know, this sort of thing. I have a pair of them, so that they don't look really, they look like a, you know, an AirPod or a little earplug that most people are used to seeing people with those sort of things. So it wouldn't make it look really unusual. And then they can follow the conversation in the room without getting totally overwhelmed. You know, a school cafeteria is probably an acoustic, it's a total acoustic nightmare. I personally would not even set foot in a place like that. But if they really want to go in, I would try that. Maybe. You can look for the Loop or any kind of, the Loop ones look pretty normal and like a regular AirPod kind of thing. And I know many people who swear by them, very helpful, and they have different sizes. I bought myself a pair on Amazon, but I've yet to try them out. So I can't recommend them for myself, but lots of people in lots of forums that I've seen for people with sound sensitivities say they really help. Or see if maybe they can also eat in the yard, if they have a yard, if the weather's nice, or a separate area, like to have a picnic kind of thing, because the open air tends to be, acoustics are much more manageable than in a school cafeteria.
I did have a question myself. I think one thing that I notice a lot, not just I mean, lay people, professional people, I think maybe it's more of a human tendency, is that we, you know, this tendency to jump to conclusions when we observe bad, sort of quote unquote bad behavior.
Sure.
Just stuff that we don't, you know, that doesn't sit with us, then we sort of automatically think that the person's some sort of person's just intentionally being bad, or they're just being oppositional. There's this really this tendency to just sort of judge the person and really not look at sort of the details as to why someone's doing something. How would you say we go about combating this sort of thing? I mean, especially if it's so sort of pervasive, and sort of everyone seems to be doing something like this. I mean, it seems like that if you can change that in people, then maybe there would be so much more sort of understanding and acceptance in this world.
Well, I think first thing is for us, the observers, to not assume that we understand what's going on. You got to ask if you can, or if the person is not able to communicate what's going on, then you can try and observe and figure it out, right? But I can tell you that most of the things that go on, particularly in the sensory arena, they're invisible. Nobody would know. Nobody would know. Let's say if I was having a conversation with somebody before I had my Irlen lenses. This was like 4 years after surgery. I had 4 years of this happened. Right? I would, let's say, standing and talking to you, and your face would melt. Now, nobody would know, looking at me, that I'm seeing your face melt or split, or you know, light posts looking like there are knives flying out of it, or walking down a sidewalk and suddenly it looks like the sidewalk goes up. I mean, like insane things, right? And nobody would have a clue. And so I, being in my cognition and knowing that my brain was playing tricks on me because I had a different reality beforehand, I could try to keep talking and pretend like nothing's going on. I would have attention issues because it was distracting, but you know, I could usually stay pretty much on focus. But if I had been a child, let's say, and these things were happening to me, I would freak out. I would tantrum. I wouldn't look at people. I would have done all those horrible things you could possibly imagine to escape that situation because it was terrifying. So most of these things, that's just one example of the invisibility of what's going on in the sensory arena. And it happens from smells, and it happens from, there are two things I would say. I don't know if there's any child or any adult, anybody, who I would say is lazy and doesn't want to succeed. That's just not, it's just not a reality. People do that because they give up, and then they will look like that because they know they will fail. They know they will be judged. They don't have the energy to do it. It's not because they're being lazy. It's because it's just too much. Everyone wants to succeed. We need to try and do our best to create the environments that will enable people to feel comfortable and succeed, and help them acquire the skills. And the other thing is to be non-judgmental, like I said, you know, like assume the person wants to succeed and communicate and they're having technical difficulties. And how can, you know, when we're not in the midst of an overload, but after, try and have a discussion with them, is what would have helped you do that? If they're verbal, they can tell you. What do you think happened there? What would have helped you? Not assume you know what's going on for them. And if they're nonverbal, then try and understand the cues, try and decipher it. What happened before they were being, you know, and not be judgmental. Most of the time, it's not to annoy people. Why would somebody want to just annoy somebody? Why would somebody want to have a tantrum? Most people I know, or you know, they don't want to make someone's life difficult, and they don't want to give someone a hard time. They're having a hard time, you know, and they don't have the tools or the ability to compensate for whatever's bothering them, so that they act in the way that they act. And whether it be sensory or emotional, or you know, if it's like an at-risk youth that's acting up because something has happened to them or they're traumatized, there's always a reason. I'm just trying to assume as a professional to try and get behind that reason and figure out what it is.
Yeah, I've definitely encountered situations where people automatically assume, you know, this person is a brat. You know, there's these judgments.
Sure.
And then that is sort of the reason the supposed reason why they're observing something that's difficult. But
Mhm.
then also begs the question, what's in it for them to be a brat?
Yeah.
Because that really, if you think, I mean, that's really not a reason. But it seems like there's this overwhelming tendency, for people to do that. But I guess, those are just more like excuses that you don't understand something. So you're almost
Sure.
like blame on somebody else for their behavior instead of trying not to be curious enough to try to figure out.
Hmm.
Uh, you
Or
can't.
judgments or assumptions or cultural differences. I mean, there are just so many things that, everybody's so individual. It's very difficult to see a person how they've been educated as well. I mean, there's just so much going on there. It's difficult to put a finger on it. And every case is totally individual.
Okay, so I think we have time for, let's do one more question here. Last one is, I have sensory overload issues, noise, and too much interaction with people. I tend to be people pleasing and got burnt out from work easily. People told me I have boundaries, but I find it hard at work. How do I ask for accommodation at work, in the workplace?
I don't know where you work. I know there are companies like there's a company in England that I am on the co-production board. It's called Abilities, but I think there are companies like this in America as well that help companies, because companies have realized that lots of most companies have neurodivergent individuals, even if they don't even know it, on their staff, especially if it's a large company, because it is a large part of the population. And so there are actually companies that go in, like I am on Abilities is the name of the company that I'm working with, that actually train and evaluate and train companies and help them figure out what kind of accommodations to give in the workplace, because they've seen value. What I would suggest, if you have a good relationship with your employer, is to have a conversation and to say, these things are challenging for me and these things might help me. And hopefully they'll be willing to go with you on that, that you're not being difficult, that you want to perform the best that you can, and these things will help improve performance. And some, a lot of companies are willing to purchase software to help. They're willing to use different types of communication, like I said, emails as opposed to auditory for a person that requests those things. I think it's just a matter of having the conversation and seeing what works. Not have back-to-back meetings for somebody that needs to have a break in between. If they're flexible and willing to work with you, that's great. But nobody will know what you need or going on inside your head without you talking about it. They just can't assume it. Don't assume that they will know what to do unless you tell them what will help you. I hope that helps.
Actually, that does remind me of a conversation we had in a prior meeting about accommodations. And when you're asking something of an employer, it's helpful to ask from a standpoint of how it's going to make you more productive.
Well, you could say, well, it does two things. It improves the quality of life of the worker, and it will also help improve the performance, because if they're not being exhausted by trying to deal with whatever situation it might be, then they'll be less distracted, then of course performance goes up. So it's for well-being, and it's for performance, it's for everything.
And it does help to, at least what you're saying is really having the conversation, because they're not going to understand why you're asking for something. And if they don't understand, then it's hard for them to hear these different requests.
If you're have olfactory issues and they sit at your desk next to the cafeteria, then that could distract you and you have difficulty in working. So maybe you might need to change your desk. You know what I mean? Or if the lighting is the wrong lighting in the room and it's making you see blurry or irritating or flickering or whatever it may be, or 2-3 different kinds of light that makes you have visual distortions. again, if you have that sort of stuff, I hope you check Irlen. But certain office lighting will cause visual distortions, even if you have Irlen lenses. So if like all different kinds of things like that, or sometimes people wear strong perfume and they spray it, next to you, and you can't focus. So like, or like in meetings, you need, or maybe you want to have an agenda beforehand, so that you know more, or an email, because you're missing some of the stuff that happens in a meeting, you can get an email summary after, or like all different kinds of things like that. And if you ask for those, I think most employers will be reasonable about that, because they know it will be helpful. You just have a different, by saying you just have a different way of processing information, and you want to give as much back to the company as you can, and this will help you do that and feel comfortable at the same point, then I can't imagine somebody would be unreasonable about it.
Yes, and there's a follow-up comment says, thank you, that's helpful. I think for me, it's also about getting rid of the shame of talking about my struggles without feeling it's a deficit.
Yeah.
And kind of what you're saying, Jacki, is it's not a deficit. It's sort of
we're not broken. We're different. We just have different ways of processing. And like I said, some things may be disadvantageous, and other things were a serious advantage. Everybody's different. And like I said, I'm a religious Jew, okay? So that sort of my philosophy has to do with something the way we think. But God makes us all as we are. We're all the way we're supposed to be, and therefore nobody's deficient. It's just what we're supposed to be, and we shouldn't feel bad about who we are and what we are. It's there's nothing wrong with us. We're just different, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. I know most people, by the time they get through the school system, if they had any kind of neurodifference, they will probably have a low self-image, because they've been told all the time that they're failures, or they don't fit in, or they don't perform, or they're lazy, or whatever, because the school system was not designed to, but certainly for people who are not average neurotypical thinkers. And so oftentimes a low self-image and embarrassment because of failure, or certainly lack of ability to form as well as their abilities are because of their difference. And so you go to the workplace and you carry that baggage with you. And it's time, as an adult, to realize that that's baggage because of the system that limited you, and not because you're deficient. Rather, the system didn't give you what it should have, and it doesn't give it to anybody, whether neurotypical or neurodivergent. Keep that in mind. So those scars can be limiting. You realize that you are as you're supposed to be, and get as many tools to make your life as easy as possible, then your sense of well-being will probably improve.
Oh, great. I think that's it for the questions.
Okie dokie. Well, it's been a pleasure.
All right. So much, Jacki. I mean, I think that I personally have learned so much, from you. Everything is, it really is. It really helps to hear these different ways of thinking. If you haven't lived things yourself, it doesn't understand them, but when someone explains it to you, then it really goes a long way. So I look forward to actually having you back, because I know we've been talking about some other stuff, but I do think part of changing the landscape here is really getting the right message out.
I hope it helps. Yeah, and I hope people start thinking. And I'm happy to link up with anybody. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find my site. And I write about this stuff in my book, my blog. So if anybody wants more information, you can reach me. I'm happy to answer. I also have a page on Facebook. I'm less active there, but you can find me. And any questions, or happy to oblige. Feel free to reach out.
Great.
I write a lot about on my blog about stuff that I don't get to in my book. Well, nice meeting you all. I'm glad it was useful.
Bye.
Take care.